And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am so excited to have Madeleine Roux on the show with me. Madeleine has a brand new book that just released today. Today is release day for Much Ado About Margaret. And what a fun novel this is, Madeleine. You know, uh, I get all sorts of books, arcs, and things like that for different shows coming up. A lot of dark thrillers and things like that. And every now and then it's just fun to cleanse the palate and have something optimistic and good and fun. And Much Ado About Margaret is it was definitely one of those books that landed at just the right time. I loved it, loved what you did with it, love what you're doing with the genre, and it's just such fun. So I said all
You.
that to say welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. What a charming, lovely play on. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I meant every word of it. Um, Madeline, I love to start the conversation with a fun question sometimes, just to kind of break the ice. And one question that I love to ask people is, "What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?"
Oh my goodness. That's so hard. I've like truly one of the worst long-term memories of all time. So a lot of this is like second, third hand from
Sure,
my
sure.
my family who somehow they all
Look,
remember.
wherever you get the memory from, that's
Yeah.
fine. It's
So I have like one or two. This one is secondhand. My
okay.
parents, I don't even remember when this was, but they like ambushed me with these artifacts from my childhood. I
Yeah,
don't have any recollection of creating them, but they're these little like books that I made. They're like little
yeah.
paper pamphlets that I stapled and illustrated of like my first books, quote unquote. And they're just hilarious, right? I mean, I was a tiny child doing this. So I think one of them is like Ariel the Little Mermaid going on an adventure with Sebastian the Crab, visiting all the different Disney princes and like interviewing them to be
Right.
her partner. And then at the end she's like, no, you're all terrible, I'm going off with my crab friend to just like explore the world. And so it's pretty prophetic in terms of who I would be, who I would become. And then I do remember like being in maybe like third or fourth grade and begging the teachers to let me put on this like really weird avant-garde puppet show
Yeah.
that I had come up with a friend. I don't even remember the plot. I just remember it was really zany and I was so confident that it was like high art. And and they were like, sure. And then for some reason they were so impressed with it that then they got like everyone in the year to come watch it.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like, this is spiraled out of control. It was just meant to be something really silly and fun. Um, yeah, I'm sure I was convinced that that was like the launch of my career at the time. But yeah, so it's kind of been an always thing. My parents were very like, my dad was an artist, is an artist. He's still kicking. He's an artist, and my mom is a huge reader. So
Love
those
it.
two forces combined, sort of, there was no escape for me.
Yeah. I've done a lot of author interviews over the last decade, and one thing that I sense kind of reemerges over and over for a lot of people, and it's not a universal thing, but a lot of writers have this memory, kind of like you do, of creating a book, binding it, and having a thing you can hold in your hand. And
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, well, I kind of remember. I'm like you. I've kind of resurrected some memories, but um, I, I kind of remember at one point in childhood, just books just being there. They just
Yes.
you don't know where they come from. They just
Yep.
are. But one day, for whatever reason, maybe it was going to the library or bookstore with my parents. You kind of start um, attaching these books to people. You start to realize that a
Mm.
person created these, and then, as you mature and as you think about it more, you start realizing that, well, a person wrote it, and then another person, or a whole group of people helped you with the publishing process. And then there's the people that are involved in the printing process, and then there are people that are involved in the book sales process. There are people that work at the bookstore, and they help you to find things that you love, or the librarian, or whoever. And you start to realize that these are human creations. They don't just appear out of nowhere. And then at some point you start to connect, well, if someone can create this, then I can create this.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the wall that you have to scale to get into this world just seems to shrink a little more. And at one point you can see over the wall, and you say, well, if I try and I keep working at this, I can be one of those people too. And it's a slow realization, but a magical one, all the same. And
Yeah.
so many people share a similar experience to that. And then when you start realizing that, then you start writing stories and you binding them yourselves, and you've got a thing you can carry around. It really is magical.
Yeah, it is interesting when that transition of realizing this is like an ecosystem you could
Right.
exist in, right? As sort of a like it seems so untouchable and sort of magical,
Right.
and distant. And then when you realize like, wait, this someone does this for a job. Like this, like
Right.
my dad is in advertising. I could be in this, right? It's
Right.
yeah, it is an interesting transition when it stops feeling like alchemy and more like, just someone's job.
Right. You're like, well, I could be an exterminator, or I could
Right.
write books.
Right. Yeah.
Like, everybody has to make a paycheck somehow. But
Yeah.
um Madeline, as I started kind of digging into your work and looking into your back catalog, because I know that you published over 20 books.
Yeah, this is
Um
25 today is
25.
25.
Cool.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
But an interesting thing happened when I started looking in the back catalog of this Regency romance author. Um, is that there's a lot of other things other than Regency romance in your back catalog, which I absolutely love, because as a reader, as an avid book lover, all of my life, I don't just latch onto one genre that I love. I love to read
Thank
fantasy. I
you.
love to read sci-fi. I love to read murder mysteries,
Yep.
and I love to read a little Regency romance every now and then. I
Heck
love
yeah.
to watch Regency romance with my wife, and that's
Yep.
something we bond and connect over. And then I like to read a brutal murder mystery every now
Yep.
and then. We
Yep.
are three-dimensional people.
Yeah.
How do you well, let me just ask this, and this is maybe a question that could be viewed two different ways from you, because you as a writer maybe have one opinion about this, but as someone who lives and works in the publishing industry, maybe you have a different view on this. But how do you feel about authors that um that like to write in different genres? And I'm talking about genres that are not connected. Regency
Mhm.
romance and a book about Loki are generally not connected. So how do you feel as a writer about that? And then how do you feel like publishing feels about that?
Yeah, that's a fun one. We could be here for days. um, but
Yes.
I'll try to keep it
Okay.
short. So yeah, I also thank you. You're my favorite reader, perhaps on planet Earth, because that's how I feel. I grew up reading everything. Right, I was a huge Shakespeare nerd. I was a huge Jane Austen nerd, and then I was a huge Anne Rice nerd. And it just sort of like went on and on. Right, and then I got into Tolkien, and it's like these like I am a three-dimensional person. I contain multitudes.
Right.
I have a lot of interests. I think it can be I don't want to be careful here, but like I have like pretty severe ADHD. I'm on the autism spectrum. Like
Yeah, I think
I
a lot of us are
right.
in
And
this
it but it's
industry.
so for me, it's like
It's a
I've always
superpower.
been a right. I've always been a Renaissance person. I've
Yeah.
never really pigeonholed myself in that way. Like I'm a jock. Like I weightlift like very seriously. It's like one of my greatest passions in life. And it's like I've just never thought that a person should be one thing.
So I
And
went to
so
your so I went to your Instagram account, and I was really impressed with your Olympic lifting. That was it's not
thank
something you
you.
see in a lot of Regency romance authors again.
Yeah, right. And that's sort of the thing, right? It's like I see all of these things as strengths, right? Because, if I'm writing a male hero, a male
Hmm.
Regency hero, they tend to be these like huge beefcakes. And I'm like, well, how is this person getting enough protein and exercise to look this way? Right. Like I can't help but think
Right.
about it. And like I'm working on the second one in that series for, Violet, her sister is the hero.
Yeah.
And the male interest is like he's a big, beefy lad, but it's like, okay, what things would be available in this time period to actually maintain that kind of body mass? Like, I can't not think about that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I see it as like, no, this is a gift, right? Like, okay, were they swimming? Yes. And then like I learned all about sort of like the nascent sport of swimming and like, how would he have gotten into that? What would that look like? How would, how do you facilitate that? So I think a lot of that stuff is actually great when you can bring in your own sort of range of interest.
Yeah.
It will sort of propel you into these modes of research where you're like, oh, this is actually great, I can use a lot of this stuff, right? It's backstory, it's detail, it's what kind of makes someone tick. But yeah, I'm one of those people who I read in every single genre. I think every genre has something to teach another one.
Sure.
Personally, that's how I approach
Yeah.
it. I kind of started in horror, and that was not a long-term plan for me. It
Yeah.
was sort of like this is what got me into got my foot in the door, right? But it was never like I never assumed like, oh, I'm a horror author forever, right? Like,
Right.
but the industry is like, yes, you are. That is exactly what you are for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And it's tough because I see it both ways, right? Which is like I, this is like always the example I go to. Like I love Lady Gaga's like club era of music, and then she sort of did something else, and I was like, this isn't for me. But like, I don't hate you, Lady Gaga. I just like
Right.
this
Right.
is just you want to do this kind of art. I'm not super into it. I'll be here if you. I'll still listen to your back catalog. If you go back to the stuff I enjoy, I'll be there, right?
Right.
And so I understand when readers are like, why aren't you just writing Asylum books for the rest of your life? Why haven't you written 45 of these, right? Because their experience is not my experience. They just love those books. I,
Yeah.
however, would go crazy if I tried to just
Right.
stay. That's not me. I could never be like one of those people who can just write like 30 books in one series. That's not who
Yeah.
I am. I like to challenge myself. I like to branch out. And you can't really do that within one series, right? You're
Sure.
trying to deliver a consistent experience. If you're like, like in the next Regency romance, we're dealing with Margaret's sister, you're gonna get a very similar experience to this one,
Yeah.
right? To the first one. And I feel strongly about that, right? Like a series should feel consistent. It should feel like it's delivering on the promise of the first book. But I don't want to deliver on that promise for 40 years.
Right.
I have other things I'm interested in talking about that are not appropriate in like a Regency romance, right? So
Yeah.
I just see it sort of like there are different parts of my psyche and my personality and life that I want to explore. And there are different genres that are better attuned for those things. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I have a book that I wrote one time, and I wrote this book during a very difficult time in life where something was going on with one of our children, and it was very much a way for me to process what I was
Yes.
going through,
Mhm.
and a lot of people really connected with that book, and they were just like, "Please write something else like that," and I was like, "Well, I'm not going through that
You
anymore.
can't, right? And
I
you can't
can't."
recreate the circumstances. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I
Yeah.
can't reconnect with that. I can read it now and I can really appreciate what came out of it, but I'm just not there anymore,
Mhm.
and that's because if you're a writer, you're a professional, you should be able to sit down and connect with whatever you connect with and write it, but it's a little more ethereal than that.
Yes.
It's a science and an art, and it just doesn't the same. Sometimes you just can't recreate. Sometimes you can. There are plenty of fantasy writers who can create the same thing. I don't mean to be dismissive. The same thing the same
Right.
type of thing over and
Right.
over again,
But
and
I
that's
think even there, you can start to see when someone is getting
right.
a little stale, a little like
Yeah,
they would like to maybe do something else. I can
sure.
at least always detect it. I can always sense when a writer is sort of like, oh my God, like I know I am on contract for this, but at what cost, right? To
Right.
my mental, emotional health. Yeah, like the Loki book is such a perfect example. Like that book cannot exist in a different version of my life because
Right.
like I was asked to do a book about someone losing their brother in tragic sudden circumstances and that had literally just happened like while I
Mm.
was asked to do that to me. So it was like
Oh, wow.
I can't write that book in a universe where my brother is still alive, right? Like there you
Mm.
don't get that book out of me if he was not, had not just passed, right? So it's
Right.
like you can't recreate that. You can't come
Right.
to me and be like, "Well, just keep doing sad brother books." It's like, well, that was like a very specific period of grieving that I wrote that in. It was like you said, it was like a processing moment for
Right.
me. And certainly I will probably touch on that again in other work, but it won't look the same, right? I'm
Yeah.
not in that same place anymore. So yeah, and you know what I think it is that like this is why I tell people like even if you don't plan on publishing, like just writing and sharing it with
Mhm.
people is really useful because like I find I'm so much more empathetic to other creators. Like when I see a show or a movie where I'm like, "Oh my god, you were like so close, but like something fell apart here."
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
like I'm much less likely to go online and be like, "Yeah, I can't believe that they baby." Like you just don't know. You don't know like what happened in in the process of this. You don't know if like someone left the project, right? Like it's amazing
Sure.
that anything gets made. And at the end of the day, it's a miracle that any book is good, any movie is good.
Right.
So I just tend to it's made me much more like I don't know what went on here. It's not really my place to like I could say I didn't enjoy it, but I'm never going to like savage the people who made it because it's just you just don't know. You have, you know.
Right. And, the one of the great things about writing fiction is it enables you to use a metaphor for things that you're going through without being quite so on the nose. And I'm speaking from my experience, but it sounds like, um, you writing the Loki book allowed you to use
It
Loki
was
in that
on the
world,
nose.
yeah,
It lived
but
on my nose. Yeah.
yeah, but steeped in metaphor at the same
Yep.
time. Like, you weren't writing about Madeline's brother.
No,
You're
no, yeah.
dealing with these characters and their relationship, but it allowed you to pour all of that you needed to into that
Yes.
metaphor. And, um, and, some of that feels very on the nose. You have readers that will read something that you wrote, and they're like, "Boy, you were really, going deep on this." And you're like, "Well, I wasn't thinking about that at all." But then
Yeah.
other times, they'll not get it at all, but every bit of that emotion is connected in it for you. But that's the beautiful thing about metaphor, I guess.
Yeah, I find it the more I do this, the more I'm prone to being a little more ham-fisted because I'm always shocked how people don't really see what you're trying to do. So
Yeah.
now I try to just be very like intentional is the word I would use and not really try to like be too clever. I think that's really where people go wrong is trying to like be too clever about something. You're like, well, now you're obscuring it and the sort of like quick reader is not going to get it, right?
Yeah.
Um, sorry, I have to tuck my dog in. He's being a
Yeah.
complete idiot. Come on, here you go. So I keep the bed right next to the desk. So
I hear you. I hear you. I
let's
have
see.
one of those as well.
Yeah.
From the Asylum series that you, talked about, that first series that really broke you into writing, um, and said that you can't keep recreating that process over and over again. How did when you came to the end of that project, how did you then start to move on to what was next? Because I'm sure because that was a very successful series, and I'm sure that there was plenty of, uh I'm sure there were plenty of people that
Sorry.
wanted you to recreate it. Did we drop out?
Yeah, I lost it for a sec. Sorry.
Okay,
If
that's
you could
okay.
just summarize the question quickly.
Yeah,
Sorry, I lost
absolutely.
the internet.
When you kind of ended your Asylum series, and
Yeah.
it was a very successful series, and like we alluded to earlier, I'm sure there were plenty of people that wanted you to continue that or continue in that vein. How did you then start something brand new and branch out? And because you've also written for the D&D universe, the Marvel universe, Star Wars, I think.
Yeah.
You've but all of those were loosely connected genre wise. But how did you kind of move past your Asylum series and start to do something new and fresh?
Well, I think there's always like when you finish a series, there's a lot of mixed emotions, right? It's bittersweet. There's a sense of satisfaction and
Yeah.
achievement, but there's also a real energy to sort of move on to something else. Like in the process of finishing that, I know for me at least, I can't speak for other people, but other ideas were generating and sort of like had to go sit on the sidelines, while I was doing that. And so by the time I was done, it was like, okay, I'm so ready to like jump into something else. And it's hard because it's like that was sort of lightning in a bottle, that series. The timing was incredibly fortunate. The covers were great. Like you just can't really guarantee that. And at the time I didn't know that, right? And so you're just sort of delusionally marching on when you're in your mid 20s. You're like, every book now will be the same success. No, absolutely not. But I do think you need a good bit of delusion to like keep doing this job. You have to just live in hope that the next one, right? The next one will hit, the next one will blow up. It'll be the movie, it'll be the show, it'll whatever.
Right.
Um but yeah, I mean for me it's like these days it just has to spark joy. It just has to get me to work, right? It has to be something I want to return to every day and keeps me excited and keeps me sort of curious about doing this job because you don't do it for the money. And so
Right.
like it has to do something, it has to generate something else. And Asylum was, it was hard because the publisher really wanted to stay in the sort of like that those books have like found imagery, they have
Hmm.
photographs and stuff. And they wanted to stay relatively in that zone. So we were like, well, we'll do illustrations this time. And so I did sort of I mean, it is a similar period of history. It's like a, Georgian horror fantasy mashup, House of Furies. I love those books. They're quirky, right? But it was sort of like
Yeah.
I wanted to do something very different that like I wanted to do something further back in time. I wanted to have a female protagonist. I wanted to, if we're going to have illustrations, like let's have some really interesting imagery to play with, right? And
Right.
so yeah, it was a departure in the sense that it's not that same series. I mean that's kind of, I'm not trying to sound like weird or bitter about this, but it's basically like if it wasn't Asylum, it wasn't going to be what people wanted, right? Like unless I had done something so adjacent, so similar, it just wasn't going to hit in the same way. So you just have to accept that. You have to accept that like some of your fans will come with you and some of them won't, and some will stick around forever waiting for more Asylum books. And some will leave and some will evolve with you or they won't, right? So yeah, it's just kind of a process of delusional marching forward and accepting that you may internet. I think this is my internet. I apologize.
that's
I
a
don't
that's
know why it's so bad.
it's okay. It happens. Madeline, you've gotten to write for some great franchises, like we mentioned,
I'm gonna
D
close
and
some of these
D,
tabs out.
the
See
yeah,
if that
the
helps.
Marvel universe, Star Wars. How do you get to how do you get invited to play in those playgrounds?
Sorry, what?
I was all of the different franchises that you've gotten to write for D&D, Star Wars,
Oh,
the
sure.
Marvel. How do you get to be invited into that world?
It just sort of depends. I had published a lot of books and part of being invited into doing that kind of stuff is just can you produce, right? Can you hit a deadline? Can you um work with people? Can you take direction? Are you willing to sort of like bring yourself to it, but also, you have to incorporate their ideas and be sort of a good collaborator. But a huge part of it is like once you have written a certain number of books and then you've, sort of told your agent, like, I'm available for this stuff. Here are the things I'm interested in or that I know about, right? Um, then if there's sort of a buzz around you that you can do it
Yeah.
in the time allotted, because sometimes you have like 6 months, right? So, um, yeah, that's a huge part of it. I think that people don't understand is that it's not necessarily like wanting it bad enough. It's can
Yeah.
you physically do it in the time allowed?
Do you
It's
find
a different skill.
Sure, sure. When you're working on a project like that, do you find yourself daydreaming about your own story ideas? Like, there's always every time you start something, there's you get plagued by the other ideas that come. But when you're doing like a contract like that, are you just like, man, I've got this? Of course, now that I start this, then I've got this brilliant idea, this book that I've got to write. Like, how do you deal with you, because one of the most trite questions that I hear interviewers ask writers all the time is like, "Where do you get ideas from?" Well,
Right.
ideas are everywhere. It's
Yeah.
it's more like
Ideas are easy.
how do you sift through the ideas to maybe find the one that rises a little above the rest or whatever. But how do you kind of manage as a prolific author like you are, and then you take on a contract? How do you deal with the ideas coming in and kind of deciding what comes next or how to manage your creative life in that way?
So for me, the good news is I'm usually working on about 3 books at once. So you don't really have the brain space to be like 10 steps ahead at any given time. You're sort of just dealing with what's in front of you, trying to manage your time as well as you can. It actually really kind of lends itself to the way I like to work, which is that I tend to write fairly quickly once I sit down to draft, but I take a long time like winding up. Like I'll, like make a lot of collages, I'll collect research, I'll save a whole bunch of articles, I'll just take notes. I have, like on my little notes app in my phone, I just have like, like dialogues or like plot points, characters, things like that. So I tend to just sort of like let it all like come and coalesce and just sort of ferment for a while.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
then once I feel like I just truly cannot wait any longer, I'm like, I can't wait to sit down to work on this, then I'll start drafting. Obviously if it's like a contract job, you don't really have that luxury of doing that. You just have to just do it. But the
yeah,
good news is like all that stuff is done for you. So all I really need to do is just like watch a bunch of movies, read a bunch of comic books or whatever, right? Whatever the thing happens to be. That sort of helps get you in the zone. And then usually there's like an outline or something, right? Like you've already determined what the story is going to be. And then it's just a matter of sitting down and doing it. But a lot of that sort of like gestating has already been done for you. And that's how I try to see it, right? Is like all the ideas, excuse me, all the ideas, all the sort of like character backstory, all the research, that's done. I don't have to do any of that. All I have to do is get excited about this particular property or,
right.
IP.
Well, you actually touched on what my next question was going to be, and that's the pre-writing process. How do you, depending on the kind of project you're working on, is your pre-writing different? Like, for instance, when you're writing the Asylum series or a D&D book or Loki or Much Ado About Margaret,
Yeah.
your Regency romance, is the planning process, the coalescing process, as you said, is that different? Do you plan your projects differently depending on the genre that you're writing in?
My process has evolved a lot over time because, when I was writing those Asylum books, that was my one thing I was doing. I was just
Sure.
doing a book at a time. Now that I'm juggling 3 at a time, it's like I have to plan and outline a lot more. I have to be very organized. I cannot waste time just sort of like screwing around and trying to just
Yeah.
sort of bang my head against the wall. I really have to like outline and see if like there are problems ahead of time. That doesn't mean there's never rewrites. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, right? But I find that I get a lot closer to a product that's more or less workable, right? Like I have a book coming out next year, YA horror that like when I turned that draft in, we barely had to do anything to it because I
Nice.
had just planned it and thought it through within an inch of its life so that when I sat down to write, it was just letting the writing happen. It was just being in the moment with the writing. And that's how I have to do it now, mostly because of just time management, like I said. So and also with like IP stuff, you're not really going to get off the ground unless you have a pretty detailed outline that they've
Right.
approved. So, you know, you have a very, very detailed roadmap before you ever get drafting. But I actually kind of credit working in that space that got me better at doing it for my own work, right? Which is like, hey, look how smooth this is. Look how good this process is. When you know exactly where you're going, you have like such a detailed guide in front of you so that you don't waste a bunch of time sitting at your desk being, well, what should happen next? You know, and now you
Yeah.
just have to execute, right? And I know that like that is not me like saying don't, you know, pants or whatever, whatever people
Yeah.
call it. Like I'm not saying don't do that. I used to do that, and to a degree, you still are, right? Like
Yeah.
it's still a creative process, even when you have a really detailed outline. I just know for me, it removes a lot of the fear, right? It removes a lot of the anxiety of like sitting down and looking at a blank page, right? It's like, well, it isn't blank. I know what has to happen. And I think that especially if you are a highly anxious person, that can be really useful because it's like, no, you're not, this isn't the wilderness. You already have a
Right.
path. You know where you're going.
Yeah, that's the big thing for me is that when I learned to plan ahead of time, then my writing sessions were so much more productive because I don't
Yes.
spend all the time kind of playing the what if game in my mind of, well, if I do this, then this is going to happen, and if I do this, then I have to account for that later. And there's all this that goes into the idea of pantsing is I'm just typing, I'm just writing into
It's
the
just
void,
vibes.
and it's not like that at all. It's a lot of
No.
thinking of, well, if I do this, then this is going to happen. And I've got to account for that. And then this is going to send this character on this path. And if
Yep.
you've worked all that out, then when you sit down, this is my goal for today. This is what I need to accomplish. And then
Yeah.
all of that creative energy goes into how do I make this happen while still staying on the roadmap. And
Yes.
it's a whole different set of muscles I've found.
Yeah, I'm really a big fan of having a big picture outline,
Yeah.
having a thematic outline, having a character every main character that's going to have an arc that you should be able to see that
Right.
separately. And what outlining does for me is that it shows me the problems. It shows me the blanks. It shows me because I think what people like what amateur writers underestimate how much stuff goes into a book. Like just how much minute to minute plot action business you need to keep it moving and to keep your characters like evolving, right? And so when I outline, I can see if I am like missing, oh, okay, actually we need like a subplot here, or right, like we need this side character to do something so that they're on screen more and then XYZ, right? But like I can't visualize that ahead of time and same with like, I feel like draft one is when the writing really begins. Like, once it's finished, you can actually see the problems. You can actually see, like, okay, this arc is kind of thin, or like, this never actually ends up happening the way I want it to. And then you can go back and really like create the magic of, okay, the loop is closed on this, it's closed on
Right.
this, and then everything feels good, right? Um, so yeah, that's but outlining again, it gets you fast, it gets you to that point faster and faster. And
Right.
that's what I'm always wanting. I'm always wanting to get to the end of a first draft so that I can finally see where the weaknesses are.
In Dabble, we have a great feature called the plot grid that allows you to kind of get a visual overview of all of those elements that you talked about, and you can see chapter by chapter or scene by scene. you can make different columns for it and see
Mhm.
if you're hitting all of those notes kind of in a kind of overview visual sense. But Doug asked a great question: how do you balance all those outlines in a way that isn't totally overwhelming?
I will tell you when I figure it out. That's can we rate check that question for 20 years from now?
Yep.
No, it is like so I sort of thrive in that. I like juggling multiple ideas at a time just because
Little
it sort of
controlled chaos.
yeah,
Yeah.
it makes go every day I sit down to work, it's like a little different. It's like it keeps it like a little spicy. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
today I'm writing, a Marvel superhero, and tomorrow I'm writing like a cozy Regency fiction. It just I have my brain is working at like my body is sometimes seems like I do nothing, but my brain is going at 4,000 miles an hour
Right.
100% of the time. So honestly, it is just organization at the end of the day. It's annoying stuff. It's spreadsheets. It's like calendar usage. So terrible. It's calendar usage, like very like deadlines, keeping them in order. Just like I'm very old school. I just use Word documents, but either way, I'll have like here's the pitch, here's the outline, like every single document, folders, subfolders, right? Of just like keeping everything in a place where I can get to it quickly and easily to reference. I have like if it's a series, another book in a PDF form so I can search it if I need to, right? Like basically just like smoothing the wheels, greasing the wheels as much as possible. But at the end of the day, it's just boring, like calendars and calendars and
Yeah.
documents. I don't, it's like I do think too, like I don't know how many neurodivergent folks are out there, but like I have like transition songs that I'll use for all my projects. So I'll sort of be like, okay, this is the song that gets me really jazzed to write in this world. So I'll like listen to it a few times, and that's like tries to signal my brain like, okay, we're in this place now. We're in this vibe, we're in this atmosphere. But yeah, any kind of trick like that that you can use to sort of cue your brain that like we're over here now, we're doing this, we're no longer in that space.
I'm glad you said that because I have a playlist in Spotify that is my writing playlist, and the songs change depending on what I'm writing. But it always begins with one particular song, and I won't tell what it is because it's kind of goofy and it's kind of
Oh
embarrassing.
no.
But when I play that song, it tells my brain, okay, it's time to write now. And then everything that follows after that can be different, but it's just a little weird trick that I use. I'm glad someone else does that as well. Madeline,
Yeah,
did we lose you again?
it's just it's coming and going. The
Oh,
internet is
okay.
coming and going.
Okay.
Sorry. I don't know
That's
what's
okay.
happening today.
That that's okay. We'll
But
just
I
power
heard I
through.
heard you. I love
Yeah.
that. I love the song trick. I
Yeah.
think it's really silly. I think people like discard silly advice like that, but you'd be surprised. We're really simple creatures at the end of the
Absolutely.
day.
Absolutely. I saw another interview that you had done a couple of years ago, I think, and you had mentioned, and at the time it probably felt like just a throwaway comment or something. You said that you like to read Regency romance, but just in your for your own reading and your own entertainment. That it was just in as a um, as a contrast to kind of the stuff that you're into every day in your professional writing, that this was just like a happy place that you could go to. How did you take this thing that you loved just from you personally and decide, okay, I'm going to write this now? I think I can bring my voice to this space and I can do something new and different, and expand my readership to a whole different place.
It's interesting. It's like it's so funny that I ended up in horror first because I was like a Regency romance and just in general historical romance girly like my whole life. Like growing up,
Yeah.
that was a ton of what I read. It's just funny that sometimes the thing you read a lot is not necessarily where you end up first.
Right.
So it was sort of like it's weirdly sort of a homecoming in the sense of like This has been, kicking around in my head for a long time, and I consume a lot of it. So I don't know. I think it, because of that, I felt like I had a unique window into what I think is sort of not there. And maybe types of audiences that weren't necessarily being served. And it's hard, your romance is such a tricky, a tricky
Yeah.
genre. There's a lot of trends that come and go very quickly. But I just was like, I know that there are other women out there like me, or men, or anyone, non-binary folks too, who would love to read something where it's like, I'm not going to get ambushed with like something really uncomfy and like homophobic, or like, like a sort of a more progressive lens on this time period, because I think like it's sort of that history paradox, right? Like the Tiffany thing and like billboards in the Roman Colosseum. Like a lot of our perception of history is not accurate. And the idea that women were just like meekly accepting their role in society at that time is just not true. Like it's just not true. And I can point to a lot of things that prove that. But even if you just want to take the big ones, like Jane Austen, a lot of her work is quite progressive, and you can squint at it and pretend that it's not, but like it is. And
Sure.
so for me, it was just sort of bringing that out more and being like, I want to see heroines who have questions about the way the system is. I want male heroes coming back from, France from the war, who have actually like dealt with PTSD, who are like actually a little more realistic, a little less of a caricature. So yeah, I think what I really wanted to do was just take what I see as sort of a sensibility that's not necessarily represented, and still make it fun, right? It still can still be joyful and romantic and exciting, and you can still get swept up in the moment of it, but it can still be like feminist and progressive, and reflect my values, and I think reflect ideas that were coming to the fore at this time period. um, every time I start researching for one of these books, I'm blown away by discovering another woman we've never heard of from this time
Yeah.
period, who was doing something completely extraordinary, brave, by the standards of what we think of in that time, insane, right? Like someone who was a total badass, and we don't know about them. And I just want to see a little more of that in this genre, to be like, no, there were people asking questions. There were people who wanted maybe a different kind of life. So yeah, and I think you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have those values, you can explore those questions and make it fun and romantic and exciting. So
How does your research differ for a Regency romance versus a horror or a fantasy book? What is your pre-writing ritual of steeping yourself in the genre? How does that differ?
like I said, I start to just ask a lot of questions about like, well, what is this person interested in, right? What sort of gets them out of bed in the morning? Or what's an aspect of this that is unique and adds flavor, right? So with Much Ado About Margaret, it's about the fact that she's trying to get published in a time when that was really not it for women. You were not encouraged to do that if you were of a
Yeah.
certain uh a certain class. So then that just adds a bunch of questions, right? Like, well, then why is she trying to do that? What would that look like? What would the process be? What was publishing like in general at that time? What types of people would support that, who wouldn't? And you just start asking a lot of questions, and then you start going down rabbit holes and then stopping yourself before you get a little too lost. But in this one, it's much more looking at at painting during this time for women, like being a painter, what that was like. The book that I'm working on now with Violet. So like you just start reading about people and what was their life like. Okay, if she was a professional painter, what was her backstory? What would be a logical thing to have? What was the pipeline, right? And same with like, a location. You're just looking at what are the historic buildings left there still that are of the time. Can I find pictures? Can I talk to someone who lives there? Can I, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
with Margaret too, I had a really incredible sensitivity reader who her focus in school was 18th century like India and literature.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, actually up from that area as well. So it was like I could actually get some real information for this Anne character, and really make her authentic, and double check that my research is right. So, and I had, I'll have just like a British friend read it. Like, we don't have raccoons. I'm like, oh,
Right.
okay. Whoops.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So, silly stuff like that. I now joke that I have like the glove pass on these books, which is like when you do or do not have a glove on. And same with hats. It's just sort of like the gloves and the hats make me crazy. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
bet. I
yeah,
bet.
because there's so much etiquette for all these things, and then it's like you mess it up one time, and someone's like, "You're a fraud." It's like, well,
Mm,
sorry, I don't think
yeah.
about gloves and hats all day long. I don't want
Right.
to. I'm trying to make these people fall in love.
R
Jesus.
right.
So yeah, so it's just it's stuff like that. And you just like learn, you get better at it, right? You get a lot better. And I have a fantasy book out on pitch right now that's sort of my first big sort of like, Game of Thrones ish
Yeah.
crack at like a huge world building thing. And you just run into so many questions. You're like, oh wait, what's the banking system like, and why, right? Like
Right.
money, and then like geographically, what would they eat? And it's just like all these questions spiral, spiral, spiral. But like you have to do it, even if it never gets into the book. You have to think about it because
Yeah.
it will inform other things, right? Like societies are such weird puzzles, and all these things inform each other. So um, yeah, I just, it's just like a lot of, you kind of have to love research if you want to
Yeah.
write something, anything. I even think like
Yeah.
total fantasy. I think you have to at least have a curiosity about the way systems and institutions work.
Right. Um, Much Ado About Margaret is available everywhere today. You can go grab it, at your local bookstore. I've not had a chance to listen to the audiobook yet. Have you, heard much of it?
No, I heard the audition, and she's delightful. I'm very, very excited. We also got someone who, is is from Southeast Asia, so she can sort of lend her expertise to some of the characters who are from that part of the world. So that was very exciting for us. But yeah, she's great. She has a beautiful voice that, one of those voices you can fall asleep to, but don't fall
Right.
asleep, finish the book.
Or tomorrow when you come
Right.
this is what I
Yeah.
do
Pick it
sometimes
up.
if I'm listening to an audiobook and I wanna lay in bed and listen to it, I'll set a bookmark so that if I fall asleep, I can come back
Ooh,
to it.
smart.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
smart.
I've
That's thinking.
it took a
You're
lot of
pro.
years. I'm still well, it comes from a lot of years of trying to figure out where I was and then finally thinking, "You know what, if I just leave myself a breadcrumb, it's easier." Anyway, Madeline, if folks are just discovering you,
Mhm.
God forbid, and want to dig into all of the amazing stuff that you've been up to for 25 books now, not just Much Ado About Margaret, but all of the other stuff that you've been involved in, is there a great place that is a kind of central starting point for getting to know you and your work?
Yeah, I would say Instagram is probably the best. I'll usually
Okay.
post little guides of like, if you like this, or or like if you're coming for sci-fi, here's what I do. I just posted one for like all my horror stuff because that's by far my biggest catalog. So I just posted one on my Instagram. It's like a little thing you can just scroll through to see if you like, American Horror Story, or if you like whatever, and it sort of guides you towards a series or some books. I'm always happy to just answer questions, either on Instagram, or I have a public email listed there, and I do get back to people. It's not just it's not just where fan letters go to die. I really do respond to people if you have a question. If you have a writing question too, I'm always happy to help people. So yeah, I'm at Author Rue on Instagram and Blue Sky, and that's probably the best place to find me.
Excellent. We'll link that up to make it easy for folks to find you. And like we said, if you've got a great local bookstore, go pick up your copy of Much Ado About Margaret. If you don't have a great bookstore in your area, we'll put Amazon links and as well to make it easy for folks to find you. Madeline, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Now, if you're still watching, we are going to record a little segment that's going to be for our 60-day novel writing challenge, and I've got a question that I'm going to ask Madeline, and this is going to go out in email next month as we're sending some of those out. Um, Madeline, you have published over 25 books now, and you have a great essay on your website about it's titled, "I've published 20 books. Here's what I know." And in this essay, you talk a good bit about fast drafting and about how there is. There people have opinions about people that write books quickly. Um, but as in the middle of our writing challenge, we are challenging people to write quickly, to get 50,000 words out in the month of November. Lots of people have taken this challenge on for over 20 years, as NaNoWriMo has been, challenging people to do this every November. And we are doing a similar thing. We've taken the month of October and helped people develop a plan so that, as we talked about in our interview, that when you sit down with a plan, you're much more likely to accomplish what you set out to do. But what do you think about the fast drafting process and the idea of sitting down every day and banging out those words? Some people think that you can't write quality work quickly. Um, where do you fall on that? Madeline, did we lose you?
Yes.
No,
Sorry. The
that's okay.
timing, the timing. Hopefully you can like chop it together.
Yeah. I'll edit this. I'll edit it together. But did you catch my
I did
question?
not
Like,
hear the question.
okay,
I'm sorry.
we were oh, and Madeline just dropped out. It looks like. Oh, Madeline.
Just fully it kicked me out fully.
Yeah, that's that's okay. That's okay. The question I asked was, some people think that you can't draft quickly
Goodness.
and produce quality work. Where do you fall on the idea of drafting quickly? And by quickly we mean just sitting down
It's
every
happening
day
again.
and generating the words.
It's happening again. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
I'm
We have to do like a question in like two so that I could actually record
yeah,
something and
yeah,
it has
yeah.
to be
So
a fast question.
yeah. Oh,
My internet's from the Stone Age. I don't understand.
that's that's quite all right. That's quite all right. How do you feel about the fast drafting process when
Mm.
when people say you can't write quickly and produce quality?
So I just think that's sort of ridiculous on its face, right? Because at a certain point, you have to get the book done. It has to get done. And then I'm also like, once you have the draft, that's still just step one, right? It's not
Right.
the end. It's not, oh, the draft is done and now I send it to an agent or I send it, or I self publish it. That's when like the fun work begins, when you can actually see again where there's sort of weaknesses or what the good things are, right? What's really working. You can bump that up more. You can okay, these characters have a great rapport. I should do more with them, right? I should have the dialogue can stay longer. We can linger here. I just think, at the end of the day, there's different processes. And if you work slow, you work slow. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't understand how it's really any different. I like it's like you have a draft or you don't at the end of the day. And then you can start chipping away at it. Then you can sort of sculpt it into something much more polished and much more finished. But I truly, no one can explain to me to this day what the difference is between taking 6 years to write a book and have a first draft and taking 2 months to write a first draft. At the end of the day, you still just have a first draft. And maybe that person who took 6 years was going back and editing as they went. But I still think you cannot really do that correctly until you have the whole thing in front of you. So for me, it's just it's just a preference. I just like to do it that way. And when you are on deadline for 3 books, it's sort of a logistical thing as well. So,
Right.
but yeah, but if there are people out there who are interested in getting into IP work, that is one of the best ways you can do it, is to prove that you can produce something workable within 6 months. And that really means having a first draft within 2 or 3 months, so that you can actually start getting down to what's good about it and what's bad, and making changes. So I always encourage people to just get something down, right? Get to the end. The more you finish drafts, the more you learn about what it takes to actually get to the end of one, right? Like so many people peter out like 20,000 words in, they just give up. And you don't learn how to finish something unless you actually get to the end of it. So I really encourage people, especially starting out, like, it doesn't have to be good. It just has to get done.
Right. And I think that is one of the most important things that a timed writing challenge gives people, is learning to finish, because
Yes.
that is something that you can't get from anything other than finishing. And
Yep.
you will, that boost your confidence, but it
Mhm.
also makes you understand story structure. You gain so much by just getting through it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really invaluable because, like you said, the confidence is really a huge part of it. It just proves that you can do it. And if you can do it once, you can do it, 45 times. It's not
Right.
outside of your ability. And like I was saying too, it shows you how much stuff you need, how much actual plot, actual, action you need to fill a book. That's a great tool, because then moving forward, when you are plotting your next one, you're like, okay, I remember I didn't have enough. I need to think of another subplot, or you can be more prepared for the next time you do it. And I think it carves away at the length of time. Every single draft you get done, you realize, oh, okay, I can do this better next time. I can be more efficient, or I know now what I'm looking at. Where I think if you just stop every time it gets boring, you just don't really learn that much. And endings are really hard. It's really tough to land the plane. People, they clap if you land the plane. So
And I never get the attribution right, and I never can say who originally said this, but you cannot edit a blank page.
yes.
Having the words down, they may not be any good, but then you have something to work with, and
Yes,
that's
it's
where the real
yeah.
magic comes from.
Right. It's sort of like, if you've ever watched someone sculpt something out of marble, it's like it's a rough pass, and you see the shape of the person, but then you go back and you chisel, 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 and that's when it
Yeah.
actually becomes art. It actually becomes, beautiful. You can see where you need to embellish and where you need to take away. So, yeah, I think people really underestimate that. Like, no, the first draft is like, also, truly, do not like finish a first draft and then send it to an agent, please. like take some time, sit with it, have some other people read it that know the genre that you're in. Like, it's just the start, it's just the beginning. And I think people get really like fussy about editing. I used to say that I didn't like it, but now it's actually great. It's great once you're done, because you have something that you can make so much better. Um and it really is when the magic happens, is when you can see the whole thing.
Excellent. Madeline, thank you so much for offering some insights for our 60-day novel challenge.
Absolutely, happy to, and good luck. I know you all can do it.